Hello, friend. I want to tell you about the Toyota Avensis car. According to some users, but also mechanics, the second-generation Toyota Avensis was the least successful Toyota not only of that period, but also of that class. Since its debut in 2003, people began to fear that the brand was falling from the level it had represented so far. However, there are still many people who praise this model very much. Although the car is based on a new floor pan, the car is theoretically no different from the Avensis I in terms of design. It only has four-cylinder engines, placed transversely and driving the front wheels. The front suspension is McPherson struts, while the rear is a multi-link axle. Some claim that the Avensis Verso is a car based on the Avensis, but this is not true. The car has little in common with it. Engines. The choice of engine versions was not large, and Toyota focused mainly on the then-fashionable diesels. The diesel offer consisted of 2-liter engines from the D-4D family in versions of 116 horsepower and 126 horsepower, and two larger 2.2D -4D with 150 horsepower and 177 horsepower. Petrol engines are a modest 1.6 VVTi with 110 horsepower and a similar 1.8 VVTi with 129 horsepower. A slightly larger 2.0 VVTi, 147 horsepower, and its relative 2.4 VVTi, 163 horsepower, are already designs with direct petrol injection. The larger engine was combined only with an automatic gearbox and is rare. Which engine to choose? First, let's look at the petrols. The basic 1.6 VVTi unit is good, but quite weak. The Avensis is a big car that needs a bit more power. Because of this, it is not more economical than its slightly bigger brother, the 1.8 VVTi, which generates 19 more horsepower. Another thing is that the smaller engine is rarely found on the market. The larger 1.8 VVTi is very popular, but it has a drawback. Although technically it is almost identical to the 1.6, it sometimes consumes oil much more than the norm, even 3 liters between changes. At the beginning of production, Toyota was willing to replace the engine for someone who showed an excessive appetite for oil relatively early. Mechanics advise replacing the piston rings, but the question remains about the economic sense, because the repair must be carried out professionally, so it is not cheap. If someone is a DIY enthusiast and is not afraid to open the engine, it is worth trying. Generally, you can live with it by buying cheap oil. There is a large group of users who do not have a problem with this, but after 200,000 kilometers or a little later, the time will come. Apart from that, engines from the ZZ family are quite successful. They have a timing chain drive, which basically does not need to be replaced. Equipment failures occur relatively rarely. There is also no shortage of Avensis 2.0 VVTi on the market, and users generally do not complain about this engine. It has direct petrol injection, but it does not cause any major problems. Its disadvantage is, of course, the lack of the possibility of installing an economical gas installation. But with a calm ride, the engine rewards you with petrol consumption at the level of a smaller 1.6. You just have to remember that it is worth loading it more from time to time to blow out the carbon deposits. If there is a lot of it, it can be removed by removing the head. This is quite expensive. Excessive carbon will show up as black smoke and may end up damaging the catalytic converter. The 2.4-liter relative of the 2-liter is an almost identical design, but provides slightly better dynamics and burns more fuel. Unlike the 1.8 and 2.0 engines, it was configured exclusively with a 5-speed automatic transmission, but not with a manual. The box is comfortable for leisurely driving, but uneconomical. The 2-liter diesels are similar only in name, but from the user's perspective, different power versions are different engines. The basic 116 horsepower engine had major problems with the durability of its equipment at the beginning of production. The injection system and turbocharger gave out. The dual-mass flywheel wore out quite quickly, which often made the economic sense of buying a diesel car look sideways to the first owner, especially since it was not particularly dynamic either. Some Avensis were already equipped with a not very durable particulate filter at that time. After the facelift in 2006, this engine was replaced with a more powerful 126 horsepower one, in which, among other things, the block was changed from cast iron to aluminum, and the timing drive implemented from that point on by a chain. Unfortunately, one thing was improved, another was broken. In most cases, the engine has a particulate filter, marked DCAT. After a greater mileage, its wear is inevitable, although thanks to its design, the filter copes quite well in the city. The engine has more durable equipment, but it is not the best in itself. The main problem is the burning of the head gasket and the deformation of the aluminum block. Generally, it is possible to replace the gasket once, maybe twice, and that's it. In addition, in some units, the phenomenon of cylinder liners settling was observed. Finally, it is worth adding excessive engine oil consumption and the deposition of large amounts of carbon on the pistons. The problem is that the new generation 2.0D-4D engine is technically similar to the 2.2D-4D, so the larger one is prone to the same faults. They are observed less often due to the lower popularity of this engine. It uses the same fuel as the 2-liter version, but provides better performance, so it is worth considering it as an alternative. If I had to recommend any engine with a clear conscience, it would only be the 1.6 VVT-i. It may not drive the best, and the fuel consumption is not particularly low, but you can install an LPG system. The same applies to the 1.8 VVT-i engine, but you have to reckon with higher oil consumption. It is worth adding here that the gas system must be of high quality, installed correctly, and regularly serviced. An alternative to these weak units is the 2.0 VVT-i engine. Often discouraged due to the power supply system, but it is a good engine and free from technical flaws. It can be said that it only has the problems typical of direct injection units. If you do not plan to install LPG, this may be the best choice. As of today, I advise against buying an Avensis with a diesel engine, but if you do, the best solution will be the old-style 116 horsepower unit. First, there are no design flaws. Second, the faulty equipment has already been replaced, or can be replaced. Third, replacements have already appeared, and even Denso injectors can be regenerated, so you can live with this engine. What's broken? At the beginning of production, there was a problem with the rear suspension wishbone bushes. They wore out very quickly, which was manifested by knocking. This mainly affected the station wagon version. Pre-facelift models, perhaps due to the faulty suspension design, ate up the rear tires quite quickly, which tended to serrate. Fortunately, these are the only shortcomings of the suspension, and it would be hard to find a car today that still rides on faulty elements. The overall durability of the chassis is very high, especially in facelifted cars, where you don't have to do anything for 150,000 kilometers. The main criticism of the Avensis is its build quality. The front headlights are dulling, and there is water in the rear lights, so that shouldn't surprise anyone. There is corrosion on the supporting elements, although it's only a coating, but it's there. The paint can peel and scratches easily. The brakes are relatively durable, although there are no complaints about their effectiveness. In some examples, the gearbox grinds. Electrics are not a problem, unless there is a fault in the engine. An interesting fact is that the messages on the dashboard can be very misleading. In many models with a malfunctioning gas installation, the light of the traction control system often comes on. In diesels, it is sometimes the case that the failure of the ESP system is in practice a failure of the exhaust gas cleaning system. Toyotas are electronically durable, but quite delicate and sensitive to any irregularities. That's why you shouldn't listen to the nonsense of traders if something lights up on the dashboard that shouldn't. In cars with LPG, You should expect real miracles on the instrument panel, so I recommend buying a car without installation and having it installed yourself. Important: after purchasing a car, visit an authorized service center to check if your model is not covered by a fuel system recall. Fuel leaks can occur in these cars. Is it worth buying? It seems so, because it is still a solid Toyota with a few faults, but unfortunately also with serious engine faults. In this respect, the Mazda 6 in the petrol version and the Honda Accord 7 are better, but unfortunately both of these models rust, and the Toyota not so much. It is still a good car that is worth considering, but you have to be even more careful when choosing the engine version and carefully inspect the car before buying. Thanks for listening to me. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and rate my video. If you know of any problems with this car that I haven't mentioned, be sure to write about them in the comments.